All right, guys, today we're continuing the 2024 year in review. Today we're going to do the top 24 running backs. Let's see where these guys ended up landing. Let's see where we thought they were going to be in the draft. And we're going to talk a little bit about each and every guy. So top 24 running backs. Let's go. All right. Welcome to the show. This is the Frankly Fantasy Football Podcast. We are your hosts, Frankie and Johnny. All right, Frankie, it's the new year, baby, and we're doing our year in review episodes here. Today is the top 24 running backs. Are you excited about this one?
Yeah, baby. Way better than them QBs, let me tell you.
Hey, this was the year of the running back, Frankie. It really was, man. I mean, this year, a lot of people went real heavy in the first couple of rounds with receivers. And let me tell you something. We're going to go through them, but these running backs, a lot of these guys were league winners and overperformed their projections, man. A lot of new faces and new places of guys we talked about early in the season and the beginning of the offseason. And, man, 3 of them hit the top 5 this year. How about that? Yeah. This whole episode we're doing today is going to make you question doing hero RB and zero RB in next year's draft because running backs were the heroes this year. So let's get after it, Frankie. Let's talk about it right now. Let's go, baby. All right, what we're going to do, guys, we're going to talk about the top 24 running backs. We're going to start with the number 1, end on the 24. We'll give 3 guys in a row here. We'll talk about how many points they had, what they were projected at, where they were supposed to be drafted, and how many points they were projected, and how many points per game, and then we're going to give a little color to them as well. All right, number 1, Frankie, let's do this, man. Potentially your 101 next year in fantasy drafts, right? It has to be in consideration. Right. Saquon Barkley, man, when they talk about a generational talent, you put this guy on a good team. We were all curious of what was going to happen, and holy shit. All you got were posters, baby. All you got were posters out of Saquon this year. I'm sorry, but that move that he had.
Oh my gosh.
It's forever ingrained in my mind. I see it on every commercial that plays now for the NFL because they're using that shit. What talk about great marketing. But that reverse hurdle, first of all, it was a spin move into a reverse hurdle, legs up in the air over a guy and kept going. It was awesome. It was awesome.
Incredible. John, I've never seen anything like it. We've seen insane hurdles. We've seen guys that have flipped over somebody. I've never seen a reverse hurdle over a grown man coming at you to rip your face off, and you jump backwards over him. What the shit? That was insane.
Saquon with the reverse cowgirl, man. I've never seen that from a running back before. Absolutely incredible. All right, let's talk about Saquon here, man. 359 fantasy points. All right, he is 40 points ahead of number 2. So he was number 1 by 2 games by his average here. He was projected to be the RB2, 21.2 points per game for Saquon. My God. When you can start a running back that is averaging you over 20 points per game, you're going to the playoffs, dude. That's all there is to it. Talk to me a little bit about what Saquon did.
Guys, it's incredible. First off, I want to say it sucks that we're not going to be able to see him go for Dickerson's record, right? Single season record. They're shutting down Saquon for week 18 against his former team, the Giants. It would have been
the right thing to do. I know.
Right thing, but it would have been fireworks. That would have been, he's getting that all day. But John, Saquon Barkley, before we went into the year, I remember I told you this, and we went back and forth on champions, right? And I kept saying, I want Saquon to be my champion. My big champion. And I didn't end up making him. I went a different route because it just seemed like a shoo-in. And I still wish I would have done it because of what he did, John. He was so far above everybody else. He had over 2,000 yards rushing. I'm going to stop there for a second. 2,000 yards rushing. He had 2,005. He then also had 278 yards receiving. He had 13 rushing touchdowns, 2 receiving touchdowns, and he had 33 receptions overall. John, the dude was everywhere. The dude was incredible. He's solely, in my personal reason, why that the Philadelphia Eagles were as good as what they were. I think that they're a good team. I think that they're a playoff team regardless. I think that they have an opportunity to win the damn thing. because of Saquon Barkley. I mean, look at what happened. He goes off the Giants. It was obvious. Everybody knew it, but it just validated what everybody thought. How piss poor that organization is. You let a generational talent walk to your competitor to basically set the single season record. They're not giving him the opportunity because they're shutting him down. That's crazy as shit. Not enough can be said about Saquon, in my opinion, John. I think that moving forward in 2025, guys, it truly is. We talked about, yeah, you could make a case for Lamar. Sure, you can make a case for Josh Allen. For me, man, I think it's easy. There's two true guys that you're going to be choosing between. It's Ja'Marr Chase and it's Saquon Barkley as 1 and 2 next year.
Yeah, I mean, Saquon just absolutely blew away any of his own stats. You just want to compare Saquon to Saquon. The most yards he's ever had in a season since 2018 when he came into the league was 1,300. He had 700 more yards than that. That was in 2022. 700 more this year. His attempts were 50 attempts more than his highest attempts in any season rushing. 13 touchdowns compared to 6 the year before, 10 the year before that. I mean, just absolutely incredible. 5.8 yards per attempt here. I mean, just absolutely insane numbers this year. And his receiving is actually down from previous years of what he had. So there's opportunity. That's because obviously he's got A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith, all of that going on. They actually have receivers where the Giants didn't, and it was just Saquon. But for him to keep level around those numbers and still have some room to grow in the passing game, yeah, dude, he's a top 3 going into next year, if not the 101 overall. I mean, just absolutely incredible. Great to see a veteran, new face, new place, come into a great team and just dominate. All right, well, this is going to be a little theme in our top 5 here because number 2, we've got King Henry, Derrick Henry, now with the Baltimore Ravens, man. Another new face, new place, and sure as shit, these guys were 1 and 2 on the board. 309 points, 50 points below Saquon, by the way. Projected to be the running back 1, was the running back 2, 18.6 points per game. Talk to me about King Henry.
King Henry, John, he ain't going away. He isn't going away. Guys, I'm going to say it, and it might not be a hot take. It might be a hot take. You draft Derrick Henry in the 1st or 2nd round next year. 1st round, and when I'm saying 2nd, I mean, the immediate snake. Pick 1 or 2, right? I'm not talking like 13, 14, or 15, 16, depending on if you're in a 12-man or 16-man league, or 12-man or 14-man league, right? King Henry is incredible. John, we thought that there could be a small fall off, right? With Saquon, I didn't believe that. I thought that maybe Jalen Hurts would snake a couple of those touchdowns, which we saw, but Saquon still had 13. But Derrick Henry with Lamar was a huge question mark. And people were nervous to see how is this going to work out. Well, 1,783 rushing yards later, with 14 rushing touchdowns, 2 receiving touchdowns, and 17 receptions, he dominated. He absolutely dominated. John, he went on a stretch, I think it was 10 weeks or something along those lines. Check me if I'm wrong, of where he scored just about every week. It was something insane like that. And so when you have a guy who is 30 plus years old, performing as if he's 26 years old, when he has Lamar Jackson that actually took away a lot of that brunt force that Derrick Henry would always try to be that battering ram and everything like that, it gave him some breathing room. And then to be on a team like the Baltimore Ravens to where they have so many other options. We mentioned Mark Andrews. We mentioned the emergence of Rashad Bateman and Zay Flowers. Derrick Henry never had that shit. The closest thing he had to that was A.J. Brown, and they shipped him away. And so for me, man, and Tannehill, that was the Tannehill years. Now you bring him on a team that is this dominant with a generational talent in Lamar Jackson. John, I'm calling it, man. You fire up Derrick Henry. You draft him with confidence next year in the back half of the 3rd or 1st or early 2nd if he does fall that far.
Yeah, I mean, if anybody still does do standard point leagues where there's no points for receptions at all, you can make the argument that Derrick Henry should be the 101.
Great point.
You really could make that argument. And the reason why is the receiving was non-existent.
0.
0. I mean, he had 170 yards receiving with 2 touchdowns.
17 receptions.
17 receptions, yeah. So, I mean, when you're looking at nearly 2,000 yards total, his was all rushing, and you can't say that about anybody else, including Saquon Barkley. I mean, it's just really, really incredible what he did actually on the ground. So, yeah, I mean, I've been calling for the demise of Derrick Henry for the past, it feels like 4 years, saying no one can carry this kind of load and keep going. The guy's done it. I'm sorry, man. I mean, he just has done it. And he played 16 games, 16 fantasy games this year.
There's another call out. He's healthy. Guys, he's a fucking tank.
Yeah. Yeah. There's no reason to think that that's not going to happen. He played 17 the year before that. He played 16 the year before that. So he's just been steady. He's been healthy. He's been consistent. And yeah, enjoy Derrick Henry next year, man. He's going to be a first-round running back, no question. All right, let's get to number 3. This one was absolutely beautiful. This is one of those league winners. If you were winning on him early in the first round, which a lot of us did. Frank, I know you and I both did.
Sure.
Jahmyr Gibbs. We're talking about Sonic himself from the Detroit Lions. 300 points, only 9 points less than Derrick Henry, by the way. He was projected to be the running back 11, came in at the running back 3 with 18.3 points a game. Talk to me about Gibby.
Guys, Gibby is somebody in 2025, you're firing up. You're getting him where you can. Yes, I know Monty's there, but what this actually did for Jahmyr Gibbs, guys, this kept him fresh. We averaging 18.3 points a game. Sure, that went up a bit when Monty got hurt, but even before that, John, he was still floating around 15, 16 points a game. Guys, that puts him right at 5 overall. So for me, man, in this type of offense, moving forward in the division that they're in, Jahmyr Gibbs is definitely a first-round draft pick. It isn't even freaking close, guys. And I think that you guys need to really get excited about him moving forward because of his youth, because we're only seeing, really the tip of the iceberg at this point. There's so much more that we get to find out about Jahmyr Gibbs over the next course of the next few years. And so for me, man, again, looking at what he did, he attacked at both that receiving end as well as that rushing end. He almost had 1,300 yards rushing. He had 1,273. He ended up having 13 rushing touchdowns, which is tying that of Saquon Barkley. He had 3 receiving touchdowns, which is more than Saquon Barkley and more than Derrick Henry. And here's the key call out. 47 receptions for 486 receiving yards. Guys, that's going to go up after week 18, right? Because they are in a serious ass playoff contention with that of the Vikings. So that's going to even increase. But for this fantasy season, guys, Jahmyr Gibbs was nothing short other than gold. He was freaking gold, man.
He ended the last 3 games. I mean, this is what you want in your fantasy playoffs right here. He was number 3 running back, number 8 running back, and number 3 running back.
Amazing.
Yeah, that's called a league winner there, guys. And you took the running back 11. He ended up as the running back 3. These are the guys who help you hoist your trophy up at the end of the season. Yeah, fantastic year. Definitely going to be targeting him next year very early and very often. All right, let's get to the next 3 groupings here. We've got number 4, 5, and 6. All of these guys were absolute studs this year as well. Number 4 was Bijon Robinson. Number 5, Josh Jacobs. Number 6, Kyren Williams. All right, Bijon Robinson, 284 points for the season. Projected to be the running back 5, came in at the running back 4, averaging 17.6 points per game. Frankie, it didn't feel like he was the running back 4 this year. Like it felt like you were a little bit disappointed. I felt by drafting Bijon and Breece Hall in that running back 4-5 conversation, I felt like they were going to be the number 1, the 101 for next year. I felt like Bijon had that. I know he came in at number 4. I know he was very good, averaging over 17 points per game, but it just didn't feel like that. It didn't feel like you had a top 3-4 guy because he just never had those monster games, those huge blow-up games. He was just very, very consistent. What do you think about that?
I totally agree. And what's interesting, too, is it took Bijon a little bit longer than some of these other guys. And what I mean by that, if we look at the first 5 weeks, guys, he scored 1 touchdown in 5 weeks, and then he also only had 2 games over 95 yards rushing in the first 5 weeks. He also had 2 games in the first 5 weeks to where he had under 31 or less. That's a killer. And so when you start looking at, okay, how did it unfold? Well, we saw early on, it was still a little bit of Tyler Algier. Like we saw that it was still a pretty solid split there. And then eventually, especially when Kirk Cousins really started tanking and nosediving, and we saw Michael Penix, they were like, fuck it, we're giving the rock to Bijan. And that was the right move for the Falcons. Obviously, they're tied for number one in their division, looking to hoist a playoff opportunity here, which would be super exciting, especially for Michael Penix. But what's interesting, John, let's talk about next year, 2025. I'm looking at Bijan as the same exact way that I'm looking at him I did this year. He's going to be a top 5 guy. I only see him getting better, especially with Penix getting more comfortable. Kirk Cousins is gone, right? So the offense might change a tad, but the constant thing that won't is going to be Bijan. And then, John, when you mentioned, right, how good, or when we were talking about Jahmyr Gibbs and his reception capability, this is where Bijan is going to take it to the next level. He had 59 receptions this past year. He ended up having 428 receiving yards on top of 1,286 rushing yards. John, with Michael Penix next year, having the entire year, I see Bijan potentially eclipsing almost 70 receptions. If that happens, he's going to be a top 3 guy. So if you can almost get a value, yes, I'm saying value, on Bijan, if you can get him as the RB5, in a draft next year, I think you're getting serious value there. I think that that's somebody that's really exciting for your team, and that means you're pushing him out to the end of the first round, right? And that's where I think you're going to continue to get good value for Bijan, as well as the ceiling plays that he can get with the upwards of RB1 status.
You know what's funny is I'm looking at the stats here, and I've literally got Jahmyr Gibbs and Bijan pulled up, and their stats, Frankie, they're almost identical.
Yep.
Almost identical. Over 1,200 yards rushing for both of them, 12 touchdowns for Bijan, 13 for Jahmyr Gibbs, 486 yards, 428 yards receiving, 3 touchdowns, 1 time. They're almost absolutely identical, man. I mean, going into this year, would you have said Jahmyr Gibbs and Bijon Robinson are going to have the exact same stats?
No chance.
I wouldn't have guessed that. Absolutely not. But yeah, you're right. The receiving is where it's at. I mean, those are the guys that you're looking at next year. Who knows if Algier is going to be splitting as much time as he had. You're going to have a new quarterback in there, probably more, dump offs, that type of thing. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, I still feel very strongly about Bijan going into next year of being a top 5 running back. I just think this really 1,200 yards rushing, almost 500 yards receiving. I think that's really the floor. Yeah. But I think that's where he is. I think that's his floor. I think where you'll have the variables are going to be receiving touchdowns.
Yeah.
He only had 1. Certainly that could go up next year. Definitely. Rushing touchdowns, 14. I mean, that was 13. That's pretty damn good, But yeah, man. I mean, just a great season. Again, he didn't have those monster weeks, the 3-4 touchdown weeks like you see some of these top backs do, but he was very consistent, very solid for you. All right, let's talk about Josh Jacobs here, man. Here's a new face, new place on the Green Bay Packers. 263 fantasy points. He started the year at running back 15, ended up as 5. This is another guy. If you took this guy and took the chance on him, thinking he's going to be Josh Jacobs still on a new team, guess what? He was. And he's on a better team. He did well for you here, guys. He averaged 16.5 points per game. Talk to me about Joshy Poo.
Joshy Poo was one of the guys that we actually clipped out, and we got so much hate from that. Like, you guys don't know what you're talking about. Josh Jacobs isn't going to perform that well. There's too many options, guys. We called it. We saw it. We knew it. We felt it. We believed it. Josh Jacobs, man, we talked about the tenacity this dude brings from the growing up and what he had to go through before he went to Alabama and sleeping in his car with his dad and everything like that, to then now, right, what he's doing in the NFL and then being on this Packers team. John, without Josh Jacobs on the Packers, I don't think the Packers are what they are. I really don't. I think that
Agreed.
Josh Jacobs totally elevated this entire offense because there's so many young people, players on the team. Jordan Love's super young. Romeo Doubs, Dontavian Wicks, Jaden Reed, Tucker Kraft. Go and look at what the ages are of these guys. They are very young. And here comes Old Man River and Josh Jacobs, who really isn't that old, but to these guys he is, and he is the foundational point. He's the guy that if things are getting out of control, you hand the ball off and you have somebody back there that can get the job done. John, moving forward, 2025, I'm drafting Josh Jacobs. I'm drafting Josh Jacobs as a second-round running back. I think that's where he'll probably end up falling. Maybe he'll stick around in the end of the first round. I think maybe the first round is a little bit rich for my blood, even though it's showing like he is a first rounder for sure based on points. Not a question. But for me, I think that this was a very, very good season for Josh Jacobs. So I would be looking at targeting, if I am thinking of 2025, and I do really like Josh Jacobs, I might be trying to get a receiver on that first round, trying to get one of those top tier guys and see if I can get Josh Jacobs on the back. If that's possible, phenomenal. If not, you might need to go for him. But again, he gives you a solid foundational piece for your fantasy team moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, Josh Jacobs he led the league in rushing in 2022. He had 1,650 yards rushing that year and 400 yards receiving that year. This year wasn't that far off from that. No. He had almost 1,300 yards rushing, 14 touchdowns. He had 2 more rushing touchdowns than he had that year, and 340 yards receiving with a touchdown. So it really was very, very similar to the year that he was the talk of the town, you know?
Yeah.
You had Saquon, you had Derrick Henry, you had some guys ahead of him this year, but still very, very solid. Again, on a good team. It's a veteran guy who has led the league in rushing and gets put on a good young team with a good quarterback. All right. Other than Bijan, everyone we've talked about so far is surrounded by good teams with good quarterbacks. So, I mean, just really interesting to look at that stuff. When you're looking at free agent running backs going into next year, keep that in mind. This could be one of those years where you go, oh, shit, these guys do have value. Don't be scared off by these guys because they could be absolutely excellent for you. All right, let's go to number 6 here. We've got Kyren Williams of the Los Angeles Rams, 254 total points for the year, drafted at running back 10, projected at running back 10, came in at running back 6. This is one of those guys, man. It just felt like he was going to score every goddamn week. Anytime touchdown, Kyren Williams, every week on DraftKings, I was good to go. He was almost always in my parlays, averaging 15.9 points per game. He was the shining light on this Rams offense. He was the guy that really was the most consistent. He was the only guy I could say, yeah, you got to start him every week. Even Puka scared the shit out of me. Cooper Kupp dropped completely off the cliff. And we said Matthew Stafford is off our board for next year. So what are we feeling about Kyren Williams?
John, this is interesting. And just as I'm talking about how we were so right on Josh Jacobs and so right on many others, I personally was very wrong on Kyren Williams. I didn't think Kyren Williams would live up to what he did the previous year. I thought that there could be a drop-off, so on and so forth. I was wrong. Here's where there's an interesting delta point that people need to be thinking about moving into 2025, is that if Matthew Stafford is not on the Rams anymore, does that change your opinion on Kyren Williams? If Cooper Kupp is not on the Rams anymore, does that change your opinion of Kyren Williams? I don't know these answers. I'm just giving people things to be thinking about because these are real life scenarios that could come to fruition. Matt Stafford's getting old. Cooper Kupp's getting old. These guys could try to trade them. These guys being the Rams could try to trade these players to get actual draft capital to continue to keep their team young, vibrant, and moving forward in the right direction. Sometimes, even though the talent is there with Stafford and Cooper Kupp, sometimes the contracts are tough. And then on top of it, they might be losing a step here and there. So those are the things we need to be thinking about heading into 2025. With that being said, everything stays status quo. I'm absolutely drafting Kyren Williams next year. He's not even somebody that I'm even doubting. One of the biggest things that I was nervous about was that the Rams spent serious capital to get Blake Corum. What was interesting is we never saw Blake Corum. Kyren Williams boxed that dude out of getting an opportunity because he was so efficient on the ground. So for me, man, that Rams team is partly in the playoffs I would say mostly due to Kyren Williams and that defensive play towards the end of the year. So I love Kyren Williams moving forward. But again, just a small asterisk there. Be thinking about, is he going to be the same guy without a Stafford and another outside option that's taking away a lot of the, audience or a lot of the defensive players that would be keying in on Kyren?
Well, we've got a little bit of an answer to that, Frankie, as I'm looking through some of these stats. I mean, we saw a ton of injuries this year with the Rams. I mean, we saw Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp out for extended periods of time. Now, Kyren Williams played 4 more games this year than he did last year, but his stats are very similar. He only had about 150 more yards than he had the year before, but he did it in 4 more games. Had 2 more touchdowns. So it's interesting. I mean, this is probably where he'll end up, but it's just something to keep into consideration that, you throw 4 more games on last year, and he's going to have way more stats than he has. So
more stats.
I think he is a little bit dependent on the guys around him and the team that's around him. So that is something we're going to have to watch. I don't think it's a blanket statement to say he's going to be a top 5 running back next year, no matter who's on the team. I don't believe that. I really don't. All right, let's keep rolling here, man. Let's go to number 7, 8, and 9. We've got James Cook at number 7. We've got Devon Achane at number 8. And Alvin Kamara at number 9. Man, you just can't get rid of that guy out of the top 10 every year, can you?
Every year.
All right, let's start with James Cook, man. This is one of those guys. Projected to be running back 16. Came in at number 7. I love seeing that. Great job, James Cook. Led running backs in total touchdowns this year.
Incredible.
Great job there. That was a surprising stat to me. Came in at 253.1 point below Kyren Williams. And averaged 16.1 points per game, a little bit more than Kyren Williams this year. Talk to me about Jimmy Cook.
I think this guy, we're seeing the evolution of a superstar. I think that we are truly seeing a guy that Josh Allen and the Bills can rely on for years to come. I'm actually going to compare him to his brother, Dalvin Cook. Guys, we are seeing a very similar guy in that of James Cook as Dalvin. Dalvin was a little bit more maybe brute, but he still was able to move laterally very well. James Cook is the speed guy that can knock your ass out a little bit. We saw that. But what was incredible is the efficiency that James Cook had. When you talk about those big boner weeks, when you talk about that Bijon, he was really good and consistent, but, what he missed out on was those 30-point weeks. Well, with James Cook leading all running backs with the most touchdowns, guys, that's a guy that's going to be that boom player that, might have a little bit lower of a floor here and there compared to Bijon, but he's going to give you those massive weeks. So be thinking of that when you're drafting, because if you end up going a receiver, man, or somebody like that, and you need a super high potential running back that also gives you a real sexy floor, the first guy that comes to my mind is James Cook. And John, I think with him not even hitting 1,000 yards, he's like 980 some or whatever it may be, 17 total touchdowns. I only see the opportunity getting bigger for him moving forward. I think they're going to try to lessen Josh Allen being hero ball, knowing that he's been playing with a broken hand since week 2, right? Moving into, they're paying him a lot of money. Josh Allen's going to have another big contract coming. And so with that being said, they're going to have to say, hey, Josh, we get it. We're not trying to take away what makes you Josh, but also we need you to stop running as much. And we're going to give that to James Cook or Ray Davis, etc. So for me, man, I'm a huge fan of James Cook. I think moving forward, he's in a perfect team, a perfect division, and I think that we're going to start seeing him eclipse some of the things that we haven't even yet.
And again, I talked about it in the last episode with the quarterbacks, but with these running backs, I don't want to hear and I don't want you to buy the talk next year in the draft and people are trying to rank everybody and where are you going to take them? No, I don't want James Cook because Josh Allen scores all the touchdowns. James Cook had the most touchdowns of all running backs, 15 rushing touchdowns. Josh Allen had a ton of rushing touchdowns. Look at Saquon Barkley, who ended up as the number 1. Jalen Hurts, every year he scores 14 touchdowns. I mean, that's just what he does. Same thing with Josh Allen and James Cook. Same thing with Derrick Henry with Lamar Jackson. So I don't want to hear, don't listen to these guys saying, oh man, all the touchdowns are going to get vultured. No, they're not. We've got the proof of this. They both can coexist and both score double-digit touchdowns. It's crazy. All right, Matt, let's keep going here. Devon Achane comes in at number 8, 246 points. The running back 8 is where he was projected. Came in at the running back 8. Okay, so he ended up salvaging a little bit here. Weird year for the Dolphins. Super, super weird. Had you known some of this stuff was going to happen, I would never have touched Achane. But still averaging 15.2 points a game. Now, in this situation, we did have Tua that was out for, 4 games, I think is what he missed with that concussion. That obviously devastated the team. Really weird usage out of the backfield. I think Achane's going to be very difficult for me next year to really analyze. Mostert, non-existent. He was the RB2 last year, didn't exist. I barely saw the guy on the field, let alone cutting into Achane. They used Jeff Wilson a little bit. They used different guys in different areas.
Jalen Wright.
Jalen Wright, yeah, rookie came in. I don't know what I'm going to do with Devon Achane next year. He's super talented, but the team itself and the usage scares the shit out of me. What are you thinking about?
It should. It should scare the shit out of you. Guys, and here's why. When you look at what Achane did, let's say in the first 5 weeks, very first 5 weeks, right? He had 1 week in the first 5 weeks over 30 yards rushing. 1 week over 30 yards rushing. But you know what was interesting is that out of those 5 weeks, he had 3 of the weeks, 5 or more targets. And he had, out of 3 of those weeks, he ended up having 2 of them being 7 receptions or more. And so he is absolutely, what he reminds me of, John, is actually the guy we're going to talk about next. He's a poor man's Kamara. And I don't say that in a term of like a knock against Achane, but it's just we've seen Kamara at such a high level do the things that he was a poor man's Christian McCaffrey, right? That doesn't mean he's not still a top 10 guy. It just means he's not as good yet as from a production standpoint as what these other guys have been and have consistently have done. And so for me, I agree with you. I think him, and I'm going to lump in Kamara because we're talking about him next, who got number 9. John, I think that these are going to be the 2 most difficult to evaluate. I think Kamara, I would actually draft over Achane. I would still draft Kamara over Achane next year because we have seen the offense for the Saints be terrible. And he was still the producer there. And he gets hurt and he's banged up and Derek Carr's out and everything, and he's still producing. And so they obviously just signed him to a 2-year extension, which means that they are ready to rock and roll with Kamara once more. Kendre Miller didn't perform well. We saw Williams be borderline nothing. He didn't do anything. And so for me, man, I agree. I think Achane is going to be one of the most difficult running backs moving into next year because he could be a top 5 running back. He totally has the capability. But is Tua going to be healthy? Is that offense going to be okay? Look at what Achane did, John, and we talked about early on. But when we talk about later in the year, guys, starting from week 12, 32 rushing yards. Week 13, 14 rushing yards. Week 15, 24 rushing yards. Week 16, 21, or week 15, 41 rushing yards. Week 16, 120, but then week 17, 25 rushing yards. Guys, as a pure running back, he's not great. He's not good. And so he's also a little bit injury prone. So these are things that when you're drafting, especially if you're in a high roller league, right? I have a couple buddies that are doing $250 buy-in. Are you willing to put up your team to take him as your number 1 running back? Shit, it could pan out great. But man, is he also has the capability of putting up, a 20-yard floor rushing week and maybe 3 receptions for 34 yards. And so, man, it's really going to be interesting how Devon Achane kind of plays out. And are we going to see Jalen Wright? Are we going to see them be a little bit more of a tandem, knowing that they put draft capital to get Jalen Wright from Tennessee, right? So, yeah, a lot of question marks for me going around with Achane. But even with that being said, he still significantly outperformed his projection, 246 points to 214, and end up 15.2 points a game. Damn, that's pretty solid.
It is, but I'm nervous, man, because I just don't know what to expect. I need to see what the team's going to do. Is Mostert going to stay there? Is he going to split time? Do they bring in another running back? That could really throw a wrench in things. That would throw
everything off.
Yeah, and here's the other problem I have is that I don't think you can use this year as a predictor for next year as far as stats go with Achane. And the main reason is because of the receiving. Yeah. I mean, he had 50 more targets this year than he did last year.
Great call.
400 more passing yards than he had the year before, 6 touchdowns rather than 3. But that's not because they planned having him.
You mean receiving yards, not passing yards?
Oh, I'm sorry, receiving yards, yes. But the reason why, it was situational. You had backup quarterbacks in there. You got 0 production out of Tyreek Hill and, from Jalen Waddle. So they had to throw the ball to Achane. What if they don't have to throw the ball to Achane? That could be cut in half. And that takes him probably closer to running back 20 without that receiving boost that he had this year. So it's just going to be very difficult to plan for that for next year. All right, let's get right into Kamara then. Alvin Kamara at number 9, just a fixture in that top 10 at running backs. He's still doing it. 235 points, 10 points less than Achane. He was projected to be the running back 9, came in there at the running back 9. 16.5 points per game. What else do you have to say about Kamara?
I'm drafting him next year, guys. That's what you need to be thinking about. I think that he is so much further above Kendre Miller, so much further above Williams, it's just he is truly the guy for the Saints. Saints have nobody from a receiver perspective. You looked at Rashid Shaheed. He got hurt. And outside of Rashid Shaheed, they had Chris Olave, and he was on IR all year long. Could you imagine if Derek Carr was healthy? They had Rashid Shaheed taking the top off like he was. He was dominant. Let's not forget Rashid Shaheed and how good he was, guys. And then Chris Olave being able to be that medium route runner with the burner as well. Now that's opening up and it's elongating the field for Kamara. I actually see Kamara benefiting more because of that. And so now that they signed the extension, man, I'm telling you guys, lock him in. He might end up being, projected as the running back 11, right? Because maybe they have Mixon over him and maybe they have Chase Brown or Jonathon Taylor, right? Again, and things like that. I'm still going Kamara. I just think Kamara has a much higher upside, and I think he has a much higher floor. And I think that because we've seen it with Derek Carr being hurt, with no other options, they're basically saying, hey, we're going to stop Kamara because we know that your offense, and they still couldn't to a certain degree. I love Kamara. He's steady Eddie. Don't think of him as a boom play. Think of him as not a bust play. And if that's how you want to be able to develop your team next year from a strategy, I think if you go receiver heavy in the beginning and you're able to anchor with Kamara as in that third round or fourth round, guys, sky's the limit for your team.
Fun fact here, Frank. Since Kamara came into the league in 2017, 2024, he had his most rushing yards in his career in the NFL. 950. Yeah. It's the most he's ever had. Back in 2020, he did 932, but he hasn't eclipsed 900 yards in any season other than this past year and in 2022 or 2020.
With missing time.
Yeah, 14 games is all he had in there. So, yeah, I mean, he's proving he's what you want Achane to develop into. But right now, Kamara is a fixture in the top 10. I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be the same next year. He was on an absolute shit team this year that got destroyed by injuries.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to the next tier here of guys. We've got number 10, 11, and 12. Really interesting guys here. James Conner at number 10 for the Cardinals. Joe Mixon for the Texans at number 11. And Chase Brown for the Bengals coming in at 12. Okay, James Conner, number 10, projected the year to be at running back 25. I think that was super disrespectful and low.
Disrespectful.
Came in at number 10, 14.4 points per game. You and I were on the James Conner bandwagon knowing that if he stays healthy, which he did for the majority of the year, then he's going to be a top 10 running back. And sure shit he was. Talk to me about Conner.
John, the biggest thing with James Conner for me, guys, when we look back in hindsight, is how much they used him in the passing game. I was expecting Trey Benson to come in third down, shake it up a bit, right? Because of how electric Trey Benson was at Florida State. Guys, James Conner ended up having 47 receptions this year. 47? Correct me if I'm wrong, but that is more than James Cook. That's more than Kyren Williams. That's more than Josh Jacobs. That's tied with Jahmyr Gibbs, right? And that's shocking, guys. And so for me, knowing that James Conner was that foundational piece, man, I mean, he was rock solid, over 1,000 yards, almost 1,100 yards. He finished with 1094, 414 receiving yards, 8 rushing touchdowns, 1 receiving touchdown. When Johnny and I talk about value, and when Johnny and I are looking prior to your guys' drafts, and we're seeing a running back 25 being listed at James Conner, there's a reason we're really circling that and saying you should probably be targeting him for your drafts. It's because of where you can get him and the upside he's going to provide. Sure, James Conner hasn't been a pillar of health. We all know that. But again, if you took a chance on him with not a lot of risk involved at running back 25, and he's outputting a top 10 performance in half PPR, everything we're saying is in half PPR, right? So think of it even more so in a PPR setting with a guy who's getting 47 receptions. Guys, James Conner's a freaking stud. And so for me, man, averaging 14.4 a game, how do I look at this next year? I'm going to be targeting James Conner. I think that there is some risk. I think that Trey Benson year 2 could certainly eat into some of this. James Conner, we know he's on IR right now. He could certainly get hurt again or next year. But where the value is going to be for him, he's not going to be an RB10, John, coming in, or an RB11. I think he's going to be mid-teens again into that low 20 range. I think if that's the case, you take him and you enjoy it. And you really love having Conner on your team. So that's where I stand with him.
I'm with you on that, man. I mean, just looking through the past couple of years' stats, he's been extremely consistent with the Cardinals.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about 1,000-yard rusher with, 6 to 8 touchdowns rushing, and then add another, 300 to 400 yards receiving and a few touchdowns. That's been extremely consistent on this Cardinals team, even with adding Marvin Harrison Jr., even with the breakout of Trey McBride. He got more receiving, his second most receiving and receptions in his career, taken all the way back to his second year in Pittsburgh. So you add that, that's how you crack the top 10. It's the only way to crack the top 10, is to be involved in the passing game like he is. If he can stay like that, which he has over the past 3 years, there's no reason to believe that's going to change other than health. But the guy played 16 games this year. So he played 13 the previous 2 years. So you can't tell me he's not the pillar of health all the time. He'll give me 13 to 15 games out of James Conner. He can still be a top 15 running back, and you're going to be very happy with it. Yep. All right, let's go to Joe Mixon. Frankie, I know you got some things to say about Joe Mixon here. Joe Mixon, new face and new place, almost cracked the top 10. And guys, let me tell you, he would have. Joe did miss a few games here, did shit the bed for you, Frankie, in the final.
Shit the bed.
Was that your Super Bowl that he got you 5-6 points?
Yep. So, guys, he went your playoffs starting week 15 and down. He ended up getting you, and I'll tell you right now to be exact. It was 8.1 points in week 15. It was 7.6 points in your semifinals, and it was a beaut 4.9 points for your Super Bowl. And boy, oh boy, was it a tale of two tales for that of Joe Mixon.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he dominated all season, first of all.
All season.
I know he left a bad taste in. He was not a league winner. He was actually a league loser. That's unfortunate.
Which is weird.
It is weird, yeah. But again, that was that Texans team this year, too. But Joe Mixon all year, super, super solid,
incredible.
Man. Absolutely incredible. I mean, he's one of those guys, again, new face, new place, veteran, stud running back, goes to a new team and just eats. Just like Saquon, just like Derrick Henry. I mean, just absolutely gorgeous. Joe Mixon was that guy. Talk to me a little bit about him, though, other than how he left shit in your mouth at the end of the year and lost you the Super Bowl.
Guys,
but tell me about how he got you to the Super Bowl, Frankie.
Totally. I mean, guys, when you look at his production, I mean, it was pretty damn incredible, man. I mean, from the standpoint of 993 rushing yards, 304 receiving yards, 11 rushing touchdowns, 1 receiving touchdown, 35 receptions. I mean, John, we called it. We said in the beginning of the year, Joe Mixon is going to change the style of this offense from what we saw last year to this year. It's exactly what happened. Think about it. Even with those shit games, even with how he, really did a poor job the last 3 weeks, he still averaged 16.9, right? Where does 16.9 land? That actually puts him at 5th. He would have been RB 5th based on points per game. So for me, next year, guys, he is 100% somebody you need to be targeting in the second round. He's not going to be a first-round draft pick. You're going to be able to get a couple more, different types of players in that realm. But that mid-second round, target Joe Mixon, right? Stephon Diggs, IR. Tank Dell out for the year. Nico Collins, we saw, was banged up this year. CJ Stroud had a down year. So what did they do? They relied on Mixon. Mixon is one of the safest running backs from a floor perspective you could get, with the upside of Boom, which we saw averaging 16.9 points a game. So for me, John, and again, this is in half PPR. For me, man, I love Mixon. This is a guy you guys need to be drafting next year and watch the greatness continue to unfold.
He absolutely will be drafted as a top 10 running back, potentially a top 5 running back. I mean, I'm drafting him. The guys finished that ahead of him. We just talked about. I'm drafting Mixon over Connor.
Definitely.
I'm drafting him over Kamara. I'm drafting him over Achane.
Definitely.
It'll be a really tough one for me to look at James Cook or Mixon. It'll be really tough for me. I think actually I'll take Mixon over Kyren Williams at this point, just because of the uncertainty with the health and the age of that team. Josh Jacobs, Joe Mixon, I think that's where it's tough. And it was actually tough this year.
It was.
Those were two guys we looked at that were drafted right around the same area. They were both stud veterans. Both of them have been top 5 guys before. And that was a really difficult call. And they actually washed out very similarly. If you take Joe Mixon's 13 games, with Josh Jacobs' full season, very, very similar stats. So that would be fun next year, man. But I'm absolutely targeting him. That offense ran through Joe Mixon, just like the Packers offense ran through Josh Jacobs. Yeah. So very similar. And I feel great about both of those guys next year. All right, let's keep going here. We got Chase Brown now coming in at 12. This is a shocker, man. This is not a guy you drafted to, it's not a guy you drafted to be your one, or your two for that matter. Yeah, Zach Moss was the one, and Chase Brown just absolutely stole this job and ran with it here. Came in here, number 12, 228 points, drafted as a running back 33, ended up at 12, 14.3 points a game. Talk to me about Chase Brown, man.
Guys, Chase Brown didn't have over a 50% snap share, really, or let me rephrase that, over a 62% snap share until week 9, right? So what that means is he's splitting, guys, outside of literally 2 games, 62%, 58%. He had less than 50% snap share until week 9. Wow. After that, skyrocket. Think about that. So for me, man, I'm all on board with Chase Brown. Here is the caveat, though. If the Bengals draft a running back, I am no longer on board with Chase Brown. If the Bengals stay with Chase Brown and they're like, hey, Zach Moss, we're going to resign you to another 1-year deal. We're going to bring you on board, right? And you're going to end up being the backup. I'm all on board. Fire up the Chase Brown hype train because I'm hopping on, right? Because what we saw from him, man, was a huge differentiator out of the backfield. 54 receptions to a guy that played less than 50% pretty much until week 9, John. That's crazy sauce, guys. And then on top of that, he had 7 rushing touchdowns, 4 receiving touchdowns. He had 990 rushing yards playing basically half of a season. Dude, this dude is so twitchy is the best way to put it. He is that quick twitch in his step, and his acceleration is phenomenal. Now it's just a matter of, do they actually believe in him or not? And so for me, man, I think the Bengals do, just because they're going to have to be thinking about bringing out the Brinks trucks for that of Jamar Chase. Then T. Higgins, they're going to need a cheap running back on a cheap deal, which is exactly who Chase Brown is right now. So for me, man, I'm firing him up. I am drafting him on all occasions as long as he is the RB1 heading into the season.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I mean, he's got the stats and the archetype of a top 10 running back. Mm-hmm. Nearly 1,000 yards rushing and over 50 receptions. I mean, that's what you do need to get into and to break into that top 10. And he was damn near there, really, really close. So, yeah, I mean, as long as he's in that backfield alone next year, he should be drafted in the top 12. No question about it. All right, let's go to 13, 14, and 15 here. Really interesting guys in this category. Number 13, Jonathon Taylor with the Colts. Number 14, Chuba Hubbard with the Panthers. And number 15, Bucky Irving of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Okay, let's start with Jonathon Taylor. Jonathon Taylor, number 13. He was projected to be the running back 6. So bit of a down year for Jonathon Taylor, for sure. But 222 points for fantasy. His average points per game was 16.2.
Awesome.
Yeah, now that 16.2, that puts you right about 6, right behind, right about 5 or 6, right behind Josh Jacobs, as far as points per game average. Talk to me about the difference there, and why did he end up at 13?
Guys, Jonathon Taylor missed 3 weeks. He missed 3 weeks early on in the season, and after those 3 weeks, he went crazy. He went absolutely crazy. I mean, he ended up ending with 1,254 rushing yards, 133 receiving yards, which honestly is still shocking because of how terrible the passing game was. And then he had 10 rushing touchdowns, 1 receiving touchdown, and 17 receptions. Guys, here's what you need to know about Jonathon Taylor. He is a top 7 running back, and it's not close. He is next year, whether it is Anthony Richardson at the helm, whether they make a trade, whether it's Flacco at the helm, it doesn't matter for me, because look at what they did with Anthony Richardson. Most of the year was with him. And the defense has stacked the box because Anthony Richardson couldn't throw the ball. And Jonathon Taylor still performed the way he did. So for me, man, I think we saw the floor. Outside of an injury, I think we saw the floor. I think really what could happen from this point is he gets into that top 7 mark and you're really excited. So if he shows up and he is a RB7, RB8, RB9 projection, salivate, because that is a pure upside that he could obtain, knowing that he's averaging 16.2 points a game on a terrible offense with no quarterback production whatsoever.
They're going to have to scheme these games around him. They're going to have to. You can't do that with your quarterback, and you don't have an absolute alpha receiver. Michael Pittman, yeah, but he's not really an alpha. Michael Pittman's kind of an A.J. Brown light, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're going to have to tailor this team around Jonathon Taylor. I like how that worked. Yeah. Tailored around Taylor. Yeah, I agree. I mean, he should be drafted as a top 10 running back, and he should end up finishing that way as well. All right, let's move on here. Go to the next guy, Chuba Hubbard. Big shocker on this one as well. Yeah, projected to be the running back 24, ended up as the running back 14, 220 fantasy points, 14.7 points per game. Well, all right, Chuba. We had a wasted draft pick with Jonathan
Brooks.
Wasted draft pick with Jonathan Brooks. Never ended up materializing, never really saw much of the field. Chuba took full advantage of this. And I'm sorry, I was off Chuba Hubbard in my fantasy drafts last year, and I regret that completely because what a shocker, what a surprise. If you did go 0 RB or hero RB and you waited for Chuba and Bucky to be your 2s, man, you were in the playoffs. I guarantee that. Talk to me a little bit about our boy Chuba.
I mean, there's a reason that they gave him a 3-year extension. Chuba Hubbard looks damn good.
Yeah.
He did not want that job to be taken from him, and he showed it. I mean, he literally didn't let Jonathan Brooks, when Jonathan Brooks started to get going and there was rumors of him coming back and he finally sit in the field, Chuba Hubbard didn't care. He's still running the ball like a madman, and it was so impressive to watch. I was off the train of Chuba Hubbard last year, or heading into the draft last year, but now look, it's crazy. John, he ended up finishing with almost 1,200 yards rushing. He was 5 away from that. 1,200. He ended up having 171 yards receiving, 10 touchdowns, 1 receiving touchdown, 43 receiving yards. Here's what's interesting. When you look at those stats, they're almost identical to Jonathon Taylor. So now it's like, okay, 2025 draft rolls around. What do you do? What do you do with Chuba Hubbard? Knowing that, is Jonathan Brooks going to be back? Is he not going to be back? I'm going to err on the side if he's not. That was a gruesome injury that he had again. And I think that with them giving a 3-year extension to Chuba Hubbard, I think we can officially say bye-bye to Sanders. I think that that's going to free up some cap space, and I think we're going to see Chuba take the helm here. And I think also with the evolution of what we're starting to see with Bryce Young, right? It was here, and then it valley deep dived, and then it started climbing quite drastically after that. I think that they get better with each other. This is a young core. Look out. I think Chuba Hubbard is somebody that could be drafted next year and do very well for your fantasy team.
All right, let's go to one of the surprise picks here, and another league winner as well, by the way, and DFS winners. Guy won me a little bit of money this year, man. Bucky Irving for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, 210 points this year, projected to be running back 45, came in at 15. Yeah, 12.8 points a game. Talk to me about Bucky, and talk to me about some expectation for next year. He's going to be difficult next year, that's for sure.
Guys, Bucky was a surprise.
Yeah.
Bucky was a gorgeous, gorgeous surprise. He's a rookie from Oregon. Guys, this is somebody that Rashaad White's job, and all of a sudden Bucky Irving kept getting into there, and really it was his job. John, he ended up having over 1,000 yards rushing as a rookie, 7 rushing touchdowns. He had 397 yards receiving and 45 receptions. He was not a one-dimensional back. They tried to make him just a rusher, but he was too good for it. And I know that sounds crazy, but he was very effective out of the backfield. And so moving forward, this is going to be tough, because I say that because, John, in 2025, they're going to have a 2-headed monster. It's going to be Rashaad White, and it's going to be Bucky. On top of it, this offense has been insanely great this year because of Baker's play. Can Baker continue this level of play? That's going to affect the play of Bucky Irving and Rashaad White. In addition to this, I'm looking at this kind of as a light Sonic and Knuckles, right? Knuckles being that of Bucky, Sonic being that of Rashaad White, much more on the lighter side, obviously. But who is really going to take the reins? Could it be more of a 50-50 next year? Could we really see Rashaad White take that third down role and not it be kind of a possession by possession type of thing is what they did this year? So for me, man, enjoy what Bucky did this year, but also he's not a guy I am going to be reaching for, is the best way to put it, for next year. I need Bucky Irving to drop into my lap at the perfect placement. That way I feel really comfortable in case he doesn't perform to what he did, because maybe the Buccaneers offense isn't the same. But I loved Bucky this year.
Well, the other thing to be nervous about as well is he going to get as many targets as he did last year or this year? I mean, you lost Chris Godwin, and there was a period of time where Mike Evans and Godwin were gone for a stretch of games. So those receptions had to go somewhere. They had the two running backs in there, but he pretty much ran 30% to 60% of, snap share the entire year. He was never the workhorse. He was always sharing. His highest snap percentage was in the 60s. So he's always been sharing the backfield. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be a difficult guy to draft. I loved him this year. It was fantastic. But what is it going to look like next year?
It's going to be interesting.
We got all summer to think about him, man. We're going to be tearing through and looking through everything for it. All right, let's keep going here. I love that one. Let's go 16, 17, and 18 here. Okay, interesting right here. We've got David Montgomery coming in at number 16, Aaron Jones at number 17, and Breece Hall, the bane of my existence in my leagues this year, Breece Hall at number 18. All right, let's start with Monty. Let's start with Knuckles here. 205 points. He was going to be the running back 20 projected, came in at 16, 14.6 points a game. He clearly would have finished more than that.
Way better. Guys, way better. Monty is somebody, if you're going for a 0 RB strat, guys, you can confidently pick up Monty for next year. Like, this is somebody you can draft him late. You know the production you're going to get. Jahmyr Gibbs, of course, is the 1A in my opinion. But Monty is the guy that sets the tone for the offense. He's so important that actually in the real NFL playoff, they're wanting him to come back and not just sit on the sideline and get a surgery or take the time off to heal. They need him back. That's how important Monty actually is to this team. And so for me, guys, if you're in a position to where you're like, oh shit, I'm going to be able to get Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson or one of these super top tier receivers, and then you just go receiver, quarterback, tight end, and you're looking at Monty as your RB1, enjoy that shit. That has been proven now for the last 2 years with Monty, and I think it's only going to continue. So for me, man, I love Montgomery even next year.
Yeah, absolutely. And he missed 2.5 games this year to finish the season. So, I mean, he would have been, he's right up in that range with,
would have been awesome.
Ahead of Chase Brown, close to James Conner as far as his, average points per game as well. So he would have been up in the top 12 or so. All right, Aaron Jones, another new face in a new place, man. Yeah. He's cracking the top 24. You got to love that. 204 points, just like Monty. Running back 22 is his projection, came in at 17, 12.9 points per game. How did Aaron Jones make you feel?
I thought he was great. I thought if you had Aaron Jones, guys, you were so happy for the most part. Sure, there were a few weeks early on to where, some of the backups started coming in and it was just like, shit, this is kind of a little bit stressful. But he was able to fend them off and he was able to really regain that running back one mentality. And also, guys, here's what he did. He had almost 1,100 yards. He had 1,093 yards rushing. He had 378 yards receiving, 5 rushing touchdowns, 2 receiving, and he had 46 receptions. Here's what's hard to predict about Aaron Jones. Number one is we don't know where he's going to be, right? We don't know if he's going to be a Minnesota Viking next year. Number two is if Minnesota doesn't have Darnold and now you have a quote unquote rookie because J.J. McCarthy didn't get his rookie year, does that change? Does that actually propel Aaron Jones even further into a better position, or does that retract him maybe to a 20, 22, 23 RB because, right, they're stacking the box against him. So for me, man, it's going to be very interesting. This is a guy that you absolutely need to make sure that where he's going to end up fits a viable fantasy option. So again, this year was special. I think if you drafted Aaron Jones, you were very happy with it. But I think next year, you really got to pay attention to see how the Vikings look, what happens with Aaron Jones. Does he stay there? Does he leave? What happens next? But right now, you were really happy with Aaron Jones.
Yeah, he's looking through everything. He's very consistent, regardless of the team he's on. If he plays 14 to 16 games, he's over 1,000 yards rushing. It's almost identical every single year that he does that. And the receiving work that he's gotten over the past 5 years, it's all been very consistent. He's right around that, 40 to 50 reception range, with around, 300 to 400 yards receiving. So very, very consistent. I don't see any reason, as long as he's on this team, I don't see any reason for this not to continue. He's done it regardless of the quarterback, and now we've seen him do it regardless of the team. So I think Aaron Jones will be one of those very safe RB2s, assuming He's still on the Vikings next year. All right. This one hurts my soul, man. I need to take a break. I can't look him in the eyes yet. I'm not done. I'm not done being upset with him, so I need you to take this one. Coming in at the number 18 running back on the year, Breece Hall. He was projected to be the running back 3, Frankie. He was my keeper in one of the leagues. I swear I thought Breece Hall was going to end up being the 101 going into 2025. I was fucking wrong, man. 13 points per game. Talk to me about Breece. What went on there?
Just as bad as CJ Stroud was for the quarterbacks was equally or worse as bad for that of Breece Hall and the running backs. Yeah. It was pathetic. It was putrid. The thing is, he wasn't hurt. Yeah, he was a little bit banged up here and there, but he wasn't hurt, right? It was the offense was piss poor. You're walking in and you're thinking, oh my gosh, Aaron Rodgers, top tier QB. Oh, you got Garrett Wilson. Then you bring on Devontae Adams. This should surely open up the door for that of Breece Hall. Guys, it was terrible. Breece Hall didn't even eclipse 900 yards rushing. Actually, didn't even eclipse over 820 yards rushing. He ended up having 819. He had 468 yards receiving, 5 rushing touchdowns, 2 receiving touchdowns, 54 receiving yards, or 54 receptions, excuse me. And it was bullshit. He was terrible. The guy behind him, and we'll talk about him here in a second, is DeAndre Swift at number 19 with 182 fantasy points. Breece Hall had 193. Based on where you draft Breece Hall, you look like an idiot if you picking Breece Hall in round 1 versus DeAndre Swift in round 6. That's how bad Breece Hall was. And John, moving forward, and I'll be honest, right? Because I traded for Breece Hall. He was your keeper. You were really high on him. That was one of your guys. I believed in him as well. John, I don't think Breece Hall's on my board next year. That could be right. That could be wrong. Probably I'm erring on the side of it's probably going to be wrong. But I am never willing to do what I did again for a guy that should have been, was a gold standard. You know, you were picking between him and Bijon and things like that. And it was miserable all year long. So for me, man, on this turmoil of a team, is Aaron Rodgers going to be on it or not? If he is, apparently Garrett Wilson's going to be requesting a trade. If Aaron Rodgers isn't on it, Devontae doesn't want to play there. So now you're still having a QB, a toss up. It is a shit show. And the offensive line sucks.
Yeah.
The offensive line sucks. So for me, man, I'm so upset with the play of Breece Hall. He was an absolute travesty, arguably the biggest bust in all of fantasy football this year. And so I am not willing to draft him next year.
It's impossible to even talk about Breece for next year until we know what the fuck is going on with the Jets. And we may not know anything until August.
Yeah. Seriously.
Yeah. So, all right. So stay tuned for some deep dives into Breece Hall for next year. We'll figure out what the hell's going on. Let's get to 19, 20, and 21. DeAndre Swift at 19, Tony Pollard at 20, and Najee Harris at 21. DeAndre Swift, 182 points. Again, just below Breece Hall. Drafted or projected to be the running back 14, came in at 19, averaged 11.3 points per game. DeAndre Swift was a guy, Frankie, every week doing starts and sits. I had no idea what to do with DeAndre Swift.
Same.
I just had no idea which Bears team was going to show up. I didn't know how they were going to utilize DeAndre Swift. Every once in a while, they'd run the tits off of him. Next time you'd see him, he barely carried the ball, maybe 4 or 5 times. So it was very unusual what they were doing with him. Give me something on DeAndre Swift, man. I don't even know what to say about the guy.
Guys, from weeks 4 to let's just say from weeks 4 to week 11, he was very good. You were very happy. From weeks 1 to 4, you hated him. And from weeks 12 on, you hated him. It was a miserable year with DeAndre Swift. But here's what I'm thinking. Rookie QB, right? Keenan Allen most likely won't be on the team. Apparently, word is that he would like to be a Charger once more. That would be really exciting for Herbert.
Yeah.
But Rome steps into number 2. I think this opens up more comfortability with DeAndre Swift. I think that with a new head coach, there's going to be a new OC, there's going to be new life in that of Chicago. I'm not willing to actually give up on DeAndre Swift. I think there were moments to where you were like, holy shit, this guy's really good. And then there were moments to where the offensive line just couldn't get it done. They were keying in on Caleb Williams, and it was a rookie thing for Caleb Williams. So for me, man, I love seeing DeAndre Swift actually end up at 19 because I didn't draft him, because I think that's going to position him to be a round 20, 21, 22 projection for next year. And I love that. because I see him being in the top 15 next year. So for me, man, I like DeAndre Swift. I think it's actually a benefit to those who didn't draft him because that's where he's going to be slated for next year. I think that you can get a good amount of value on DeAndre Swift and not lose a lot by drafting him.
Yeah, I mean, he's really right there. He's on the brink. It's just a matter of consistency, I think.
Right.
Because he came close to 900 yards rushing. So like we talked about, 1,000 yards rushing and 50 receptions, that's what you need. Obviously, you're going to have to score some touchdowns in there to get you in the top 10. But that's the kind of archetype you need to get there. He's right on the edge of that, man. I mean, it's really, really close. 42 catches for 386 yards, 0 touchdowns, receiving. But I mean, he's right there. So I agree. They're going to need to improve that offensive line.
Definitely.
We talked about, Caleb Williams getting sacked 67 times.
Crazy.
DeAndre Swift was running running for his life back there as well. So, yeah, it's right there. Let's see what they end up doing with it. But, yeah, the talent's there. It's just inconsistency with the team. I want to see what else they're going to do as far as coaching, scheme. They may not like DeAndre Swift. They may bring in a guy who wants to have a completely different running back or a completely different type of running game. So we're just going to have to see how that bears out. All right, let's keep moving on here. Let's go to Tony Pollard. Tony Pollard came in at number 20. We thought he was going to be projected around 17, right about where everybody thought he was going to be, I think. 11.6 points per game. Talk to me about Tony Pollard.
I think that this is exactly where most people saw him. I don't think this is much of a surprise. If anything, it might be slightly disappointing. And I think that was strictly because he was banged up. The offense with Will Levis was terrible. Mason Rudolph was way better with that offense than he was because at least it gave other fantasy players life. That's what I mean by that. And then obviously the emergence of Tajay Spears. Tajay Spears was in and out with injuries. When he was in, he was doing pretty damn good from the receiving perspective. So Tony Pollard lost quite a bit from the receiving end to Tajay Spears. But here's what I can say. Look at Tajay Spears, very similar, and we're going to talk about him next with Najee, Tony Pollard to Najee is Tajay Spears to Jaylen Warren. That is where you see this group of players. And so again, if you have an opportunity to draft a Tony Pollard, just know it's a solid option, but there's never going to be a boom. Very rarely is there going to be a boom. And there's certainly a decent floor there, but just know who you're drafting. And it actually might get worse, John, as weird as that sounds, because with how well Tajay Spears played towards the end there, I could see him getting him more incorporated into the normal game script instead of just passing. So for me, man, I think it's going to be interesting to see. However, I think Tony Pollard ended up pretty close to where everybody kind of imagined he would be.
Yeah, but I'm looking at exactly what we talked about. Tajay Spears did miss 4 or 5 games this past year. And, not having him in there when Tajay Spears plays, Tajay Spears does get the ball. Tony Pollard's on the field for 40 to 60% of the time when Tajay Spears plays. When he doesn't play, it's 80 to 90%. Yeah. So that's a big difference. If you've got a healthy Tajay Spears all year long, then you're looking at Tony Pollard outside the top 24, I believe.
Definitely.
Yeah. Which might actually be the case with the next guy, with Najee Harris as well. We did have Jaylen Warren miss some weeks too. Najee Harris came in at 21, 176 fantasy points. Thought they was going to be the running back 21. He came in at 21, 10.8 points per game. Talk about Najee. Is it really the same scenario of what you just said with Tony Pollard?
No.
Okay.
And here's why. Najee Harris will not be a Steeler. Najee Harris will not be a Steeler next year unless they decide to actually sign him to an extension. You have to remember, Steelers declined his 5th-year option. Najee Harris is an unrestricted free agent, right? And so now, talking about the Bears, perfect example. If the new head coach comes in and is like, hey, I need a little bit more of a brute that can catch out of the backfield, like we saw his rookie year was phenomenal with Big Ben.
Yeah.
Right? Then maybe Najee makes a lot of sense. Maybe Najee ends up going to, XYZ other team. Maybe it's Minnesota and Aaron Jones is no longer there. So Najee Harris, for me, man, is a guy that we really need to keep tabs on because that's going to shake up quite a bit in regards to some of these other guys and how it works. Dallas could even be something of interest, right? Assuming they don't go with Ashton Gianti or that rookie running back who will be a rookie running back out of Boise State, something along those lines, man, Najee could be the guy. So we could see Najee actually crack top 15, or we could see Najee be out of the top 25. We'll have to stay tuned on that.
There's a lot of places. We're going to see new faces, new places. I'm sure we're going to be talking about Najee Harris in there. All right, let's get to the last three guys here in the top 24. 22, JK Dobbins. 23, Rashaad White. And 24, Rico Dowdle. All right, talk to me about 22 here. JK Dobbins. This is a guy both of us were very high on, very happy about. Projected to be the running back 30, came in at the running back 22. 13.9 points per game for JK.
JK is fantastic. Guys, this was a guy leading in. We were like, hey, you need to draft JK because of what if he actually is healthy? What if he actually is the running back one for a Jim Harbaugh type of team? It happened. We saw it. He was dominant. Guys, JK Dobbins was dominant when he got the chance. He averaged almost 14 points a game. He was just banged up and got hurt again. But he eventually came back, and what did he do? We said to start him, he had over 70 yards and another touchdown. Guys, JK Dobbins is a true bona fide number one running back. If you get the opportunity to draft him with value, and let's say he's projected in that 17, 18, 16 spot, you should be salivating. You should be targeting him, and you should be drafting him. And you might need a little bit of a insurance policy, right, from another team because of JK, we know his risk of injuries. But man, JK was so impressive. And here's what he did. And you got to give the dude credit, right? We all know what happened to him. He came back 842 yards rushing, 141 yards receiving, 9 rushing touchdowns in 29 receptions. 9 rushing touchdowns. Welcome fucking back, JK Dobbins. Target him in your drafts next year.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, he only played 12 games and he was sniffing 1,000 yards.
Easy.
Yeah, 842 yards in 12 games. And one thing he did this year that she's never done before is catch a ball. In 12 games, he had 30 catches. The most he ever had before was his rookie year with 18 catches because he just never typically caught the ball before. If that can continue with Justin Herbert and they continue giving him the rock like they did, yeah, JK Dobbins could be very, very interesting. There's not a lot of tread on these tires, guys.
No.
He hasn't had a full workload since 2020. I mean, just think about that so that's really, really interesting. All right, let's move on here. JK Dobbins loving it. Rashaad White. Both of these running backs for this Tampa Bay Buccaneers landed and finished in the top 24. Really interesting, man. Not a guy you loved having on your team. Not a guy that you scared your opponent when they saw, oh shit, you've got Rashaad White in your flex. Oh no.
Nope.
But the guy was very solid. He's one of those foundational players for your teams that doesn't kill you, but doesn't win you a week, but gives you that 11.6 points per game that just gives you that solid floor as an RB2 every week. Talk about Rashaad White a little bit.
John, Rashaad White this year was supposed to be a poor man's Travis Etienne.
Mm-hmm.
Travis Etienne, we have not mentioned him. We've not mentioned Tank Bigsby.
That's because he's a poor man. Travis Etienne is a poor man's Travis Etienne this year.
Yeah, that's right. And he's a poor man's Rashaad White this year, right? And that's what's interesting because Tank Bigsby with Travis Etienne is a very similar backfield to Bucky Irving and Rashaad White.
It really is.
It really is, guys.
Yeah.
And then you start thinking about it. Where did Etienne really thrive was the receiving end. Rashaad White, 57 targets, 51 receptions, right? He ended up having 6 receiving touchdowns. And he had almost 400 yards receiving on top of 613 rushing yards. And he also had 3 rushing touchdowns. Guys, Rashaad White quietly was a good fantasy running back. He really was. He didn't give you a super low floor because of his high receiving capability. He didn't give you a super high ceiling because he didn't get the workload because he's splitting time with Irving. But he made up for it due to those vulturing touchdowns from the receiving end. I just said he had 9 total touchdowns, 6 of them were receiving. So guys, when looking at how this is going to make up, I actually really like Rashaad White next year. Mm-hmm. I do. I think that he provides a really nice floor, very low risk, good value, and an awesome potential package him for a trade perspective to somebody that has a running back injury. There's not a lot of flaws that I see in drafting Rashaad White for next season other than the offense probably won't be this caliber. It would take Baker to continue to do what he's doing in order to make the Buccaneers offense what it is. But for me, man, I am targeting Rashaad White deep in my drafts for next year.
All right, let's talk about the last guy here. Coming in at 24, Rico Dowdle. It's very fitting, Frankie. Wow. Can you say his name for us one more time for old time's sake?
Dowdling for dwindling of that of Dowdles.
Yeah, Frankie butchered his name early in the season, and that clip went viral as well because sometimes, Frankie, you're a brilliant man, Frankie, but sometimes you're a fucking idiot.
Amen to that.
I love you, brother. All right, Rico Dowdle. Everybody thought he was going to be the running back 41. He came in at the running back 24, 10.9 points a game. What are we thinking about Rico Dowdle?
Guys, over 1,000 yards, tip of the cap. Rico Dowdle, you were very, very solid from that standpoint. 1 rushing touchdown, 3 receiving touchdowns, 37 receptions, 237 receiving yards. All good. I'm not buying Rico Dowdle next year. Here's why. Dallas Cowboys, and mark my word, it would take something crazy to happen, but Dallas Cowboys should and probably will be targeting Ashton Gianti. And you will hear me say this name very often. He is a generational running back that is perfect fit for Dallas because he's from Texas. He grew up right next to Jerry World. This is who he wants to play for. Guys, they are in a market for a game-changing running back, and I haven't seen one to this level since that of Saquon Barkley. That's how good this guy is. So for me, man, let's just say they do draft him. It completely depletes Rico Dowdle. Let's say they don't draft him. Let's say they maybe just continue with Rico Dowdle, but they're going to add another piece. They're not re-signing Zeke. They already cut him, right? He's gone. And so for me, man, they're going to bring in another piece. So it's really going to be dependent if that piece is like, we just mentioned it, like a
Najee Harris.
Bucky Irving, or like a Najee Harris. That could be interesting, right? Something like that, to where there still might be a little bit of value for Rico because of what we've seen for Najee and Jaylen Warren. But it's really dependent, guys. This is one you're going to have to stay updated with the offseason. We will keep you plugged in here, but definitely want to temper expectations on Rico Dowdle, especially if you're in a dynasty league or you're in a keeper league.
This is another one of those teams, other than CeeDee Lamb, that really difficult looking at next year because this year was just kind of a wash. You just kind of have to erase it, just riddled with injuries, very strange year. It's not a year you can use to predict the following year. And again, we said they're going to address this backfield in there. And Rico Dowdle's very unlikely to be the starting running back for the Dallas Cowboys next year.
Yep.
All right, Frankie, that is the top 24 running backs for 2024. And year in review. I know, that's a lot of 24s in there.
24s.
I know. Numbers make me confused, man. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. I hope that gave you a little bit of information. Wanted to give you some ideas as you're, working out or, at the gym or going for walks. How did everybody end up? Who were the top 24 running backs? Oh, yeah, I did have some of those guys. That guy won me my league. I want to hear that stuff. Send us comments, guys. We want to know who your champions were, who won your leagues, who pissed you off. Did you guys have Breece Hall like I did? Did it absolutely tank your season like it did mine? Yeah, I know. Let us know, guys. Look us up everywhere on social media at Frankly Fantasy Football. Frankie, we've done quarterbacks, top 24. We've done running backs, top 24. What do we have coming up next, man?
Baby, we're going to be giving you some of them heavy hitter receiver review, and then we're diving into the tight ends. And don't forget, we will be wrapping up our season with an overview of the rookie review in a couple weeks. Stay tuned. We got you guys covered, and we're looking forward to one hell of a fun offseason, getting you guys ready for your drafts for 2025.
All right, let's do it. May the fantasy gods smile upon you. Bye.